Welcome to the second webinar in our series, Integrating Teaching, Research, and Activism, being co-sponsored by Reproaction and Sociologists for Women in Society. The first one was a couple of weeks ago, and it went really well. You can check out that recording at Reproaction's website. It'll also be sent out once we're done with the series through SWS's listserv and publicly, and you'll be able to revisit these at any time if you'd like. So nowhere is there. And let's get into this. Can y'all believe it's November? October had somewhere to be. So I just want to talk a little bit about Reproaction. We are working, to increase access to abortion and advance reproductive justice. We're proud of our left-link analysis and are not in this fight to protect the past or maintain the status quo. We celebrate legal, accessible, and funded abortion as a great thing. We hold the right to parent and the right to raise children in safe and healthy communities. It's equally sacred in the struggle for dignity. Increase the use of direct action in accomplishing our goals. We're based out of DC. We have people spread out across the country. You can follow us at Reproaction on Facebook, X, and Instagram. And you can also check out our website where you can find information about all of our campaigns, where we write incredible sourced pieces, and I found out information that you might need about things like self-managed abortion, criminalization of abortion, maternal and infant mortality, all sorts of things that can help you. So Sociologists for Women in Society, it's a nonprofit professional feminist organization dedicated to transforming the academy and professional organizations, including our own, by actively supporting feminist leadership and advancing career development of feminist scholars. Recognizing that structural inequalities impact those marginalized by their identities and that this requires proactively promoting the creation of inclusive institutional spaces in an ongoing manner and by practicing critical reflexivity, advocating and encouraging the development of sociological feminist theory rooted in intersectionality and cutting-edge research for publication and dissemination, and promoting social justice research within local, national, and international activist spaces by by supporting scholar activist communities seeking to dismantle intersecting systems of oppression. You can follow Sociologists for Women in Society at SocialWomen. The website is socialwomen.org. It's a great space. You do not have to be a sociologist to join, but you do need to join the national organization, which is the American Sociological Association, and Sociologists for Women in Society is the section for femmes and people who care about femmes and women and, just not men. Everybody's invited. All right. So I want to get grounded. Just two tidbits. The other one's on the next slide. This is a three-panel series where scholar activists and movement leaders are discussing how they use education as a tool for liberation, which we did in the first webinar. That was a couple of weeks ago, how they conduct and apply research to advance social justice issues, which is happening right now, and how they integrate teaching, education, research, and activism, which we'll talk about in the last panel, which you can still sign up for, which we'll get into November 15th in a couple of weeks. And I do want to make the point that while we have words to describe teaching, research, and activism separately, they are reflexive processes in social justice advocacy, and that's reflexive in a sociological sense where they are, they feed into each other, bounce off each other, right? You really need all of these things, like they're different aspects of advocacy work. So your Social Action Committee co-chairs from SWS, Heather Holowska, and myself, Ivania Woods, have co-organized this series for you. Heather is on the panel today, which is why you're hearing from me. moderating this wonderful panel that we have. And with that said, and I do want to talk about, mention that the goal of the Social Action Committee is, bridging that gap between academics and social justice advocates in a more traditional sense that are doing movement work on the ground. And so that's what we committed to. It's 2-year terms. We stagger our co-chairs in the organization. And so Heather will be leaving in January, and we'll be getting another co-chair, and I'll be carrying on with them for the next year. So just a quick overview of our panelists. There's Kelly Baden, who's with the Guttmacher Institute, Maricela Martinez Cola, Erin Maxson with Reproaction, Heather Lafka, of course. And we're going to start with Kelly, who has nearly 20 years of experience in reproductive rights, currently the VP for Public Policy at the Guttmacher Institute. She currently oversees the public policy team to advance evidence-based policies. She was formerly in charge of the state advocacy and policy portfolio at the Center for Reproductive Rights, and worked at the National Institute for Reproductive Health, Physicians for Reproductive Health, Planned Parenthood Affiliates of New Jersey, and Emily's List. So we get 20 years, okay? And so she serves on the board of URGE, and some of you may know that's a repro org as well, and was a recent reproductive health rights and justice fellow with the Rockwood Leadership Institute. She has a bachelor's degree in political science and women's and gender studies. Shout out to women and gender studies from the College of New Jersey. I'm so happy to have you here, Kelly. Next up is Dr. Maricela Martinez Cola from Morehouse College. And she's a proud Chicana daughter of an immigrant and first-generation scholar. She earned her bachelor's degree in psychology and African American studies from the University of Michigan and her law degree at Loyola University, Chicago School of Law. She switched career paths and became the director of multicultural affairs at a variety of institutions throughout the country. And after nearly 10 years, transitioned into academic affairs and earned her PhD in sociology at Emory University. And she's been published in the Journal of Law and Society, Sociology of Race and Ethnicity, Teaching Sociology, and Latino Studies. And I'm super excited to learn more about Maricela, and so happy to have you here as well. And then my boss, Erin Maxson, co-founder and president and CEO of Reproaction, is, which, we just reviewed Reproaction a few seconds ago, but it's a national group using bold action to increase access to abortion and advance reproductive justice. She served as Action Vice President for the National Organization for Women, and at age 23, she was elected to be the youngest now state president in the country. She also served as an editor-at-large for Rewire News Group. Her writings have appeared in a variety of publications, including Rolling Stone and 3 books. Erin serves on the steering committee of the American Society for Emergency Contraception, and recently completed 3 terms on the NARAL Pro-Choice Virginia Foundation Board of Directors, and happy that Erin has the time, very busy as everyone on this panel is, and I'm glad that you can participate in this conversation. Heather Lafka is an associate professor at Marquette University, co-chair of Social Action Committee, is a professor of criminology and law studies in the Department of Social and Cultural Sciences at Marquette. She studies sexual violence, trauma, and carceral logics, and is a crisis advocate on her campus. She serves on the faculty advisory board of the Center for Urban Research, Teaching and Outreach, on the affiliated research faculty and advisory board of the Institute for Women's Leadership, and is the co-chair of the SWS Social Action Committee. She has authored 2 books, Bodies and Evidence, Race, Gender, and Science in Sexual Assault, Adjudication. I just feel like I'm chopping that up. Not a word I say all the time, but I know what it means. And Researching Gender-Based Violence, Embodied and Intersectional Approaches. And that'll bring us into our panel discussion today. So we're going to get started with that. What led to your understanding of the importance of research in advancing social justice issues? Just kind of a grounding question, just to set us up, loosen us up to get in more depth here in the future. And Kelly, We're going to start with you and just work our way across as you see your photos at the bottom of the screen.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me. I love this question, and I'm going to tell just a brief story that I think helps illustrate my answer to it. And I would say I'm a little bit using research and science kind of interchangeably in this example, but I think the point still stands. And that was that, maybe 13, 15 years ago when I was working for Physicians for Reproductive Health, one of the things I did was, bring incredible physicians around to meet with lawmakers in state legislatures and on Capitol Hill, and of course to lobby for specific reproductive health rights and justice bills. And there was a time early on in my career where I had a group of maybe 6 or 7 physicians, and we were in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and we were meeting with legislators there to talk about a bill around emergency contraception for survivors of sexual assault, and having that be required to be offered to patients in an emergency department. And so we were having conversations. The Pennsylvania legislature has generally not been particularly friendly to issues of reproductive health rights and justice over the years. Though there are some amazing legislators, of course, but I just remember, it was me and a couple of physicians in their white coats, which we really, especially at the time, kind of did on purpose to really try to demonstrate the kind of, the gravitas of having a physician talk to a legislator who maybe doesn't have a lot of opportunities to speak directly to a physician about, bills related to reproductive health. And so as we kind of filed into this one lawmaker's office, and I honestly don't remember his name, but he kind of like looked at me, and, I was facilitating, I was introducing everybody, I was talking about Physicians for Reproductive Health, and, he understandably was not interested in me, and instead just turned to the first physician nearest him and said, listen, I'm gonna believe you because you're a doctor. Just tell me, is emergency contraception the same thing as abortion? Now, there's a lot of problematic assumptions and underlying implications in that question. I will remind you, it was probably about 2007, maybe 2006 when this happened. And the point really landed with me that for some legislators, you have to kind of find what is the best message or messenger for that particular person on this particular bill in this particular moment of time, and try to use that to your advantage. And I think, in that situation, obviously looking back now, there's a lot more I could have said, a lot more I would have said around, again, unpacking some of the false assumptions or implications of his very question. But at the same time, it did really demonstrate to me the power of research and science being just such a strong message for some particular people. I think it can be used as political cover sometimes for legislators who need that. It is often, really paired well with other tactics and strategies like storytelling or patient experiences or other, qualitative research. But there was just something so striking that I clearly remember well about that example, because it was just a kind of point in time where somebody was pretty clear that I was not the messenger he was looking for, right? He wanted to use somebody who is trained to understand and practice medicine to answer a question that for him what really was about medicine. So I think that was, again, just a good kind of early career moment that really helped shape the rest of my years since then as a policy advocate in this field.
Understandable, yeah. Similarly here. Marcelo?
Yeah, hi. It's Maricela, just, as an upright. If you put it there, it makes the same sound as a rolled R, Maricela. I think that mine, it's hard to think of something that you feel like you sort of always done, you know what I mean? Especially when, you're the first in your family going to college and you have to sort of, justify your existence in certain white spaces. And that's what it always felt like when I was an undergrad. And so, of course, that made me get part of the student organizations that were around there that kind of advocated on behalf of, of the students of color that were, or the BIPOC students that were, at Michigan's campus. This is at the University of Michigan, where I really remember being able to find my voice. I had a bit of it in high school, but it really came to being at the University of Michigan because I was also taught by some really amazing research scholars. Scholar activists that really, has some really really cutting edge syllabi talking about information that was really critical for racial justice, and so I think that ended up sort of creating the foundation for what I ultimately ended up doing for almost 10 years, was working in multicultural affairs. Again, having to at predominantly white institutions, having to basically educate white faculty members, white student affairs individuals that were there, as to how to not just, I remember the big thing was all about recruiting, students of color, but, I remember changing the conversation back then to retaining. And it's really sad because many of the conversations that I had 20 years ago are conversations that we're still having today about, the experiences of BIPOC students on predominantly white campuses. And it's been a very different experience for me now, having moved from a PWI to an HBCU. I'm writing an article about that right now that talks, it's a peace from performativity to peace is kind of what that feels like for me, to be able to be in a space where I feel like I can actually breathe, and get things done in a way that I wasn't able to do before. And after, like I said, after over 20 years of being in predominantly white spaces, that's what I think, really led me to it's a constant effort of having to explain your existence, basically, in particular spaces, and why what you say matters. So yeah, that's what I would discuss.
Oh yeah, I'm on mute. Great. Thank you so much for sharing that. Erin, you want to hop in here?
Yeah, thank you. And that is a tough act to follow. So I want to ground my own answer to this question in this moment and the tectonic plates that are moving around and beneath us. And specifically, I'm talking about the fact that we are fighting a rising tide of authoritarianism globally and at home. And here in the United States, that struggle against authoritarianism primarily takes the shape of white Christian nationalism versus democracy. And I think it's really important to articulate that, because the struggle for reproductive justice, the struggle for gender equality is so wound up in this larger struggle against white supremacy and authoritarianism. And a primary way that the fight for those who want greater authoritarianism, want authoritarian rule here in the United States, primary way that they do that is by trying to divide people and tap into very old, very ingrained prejudices about who is allowed to hold power in society. And to just say that very directly, they want white men to hold absolute power. So I often say that I came into this struggle and the work that I do fighting for abortion and autonomy and gender equality. And so that's what I came into this struggle fighting for. And I came to see that I was actually fighting for that, yes, but also fighting for democracy. And I also want to say, another piece of what we're fighting for right now in this authoritarian moment is there's a war on truth that is taking place. You could argue that we're basically fighting over whether to have facts, period, whether the Enlightenment was a good idea. So that is one key reason why we need to ground the work that we all do for justice in facts. Without the facts on our side, we don't have the power we need to fight this factless enemy who wants no one to have any power but an authoritarian white Christian nationalist structure. So just to talk about Reproaction specifically for a moment, so Ivania introduced our work. I will say that we look closely at abortion opponents for reasons that are not casual. At Reproaction, we envision a future without the anti-abortion movement. So let me say that again, because I know that's a really bold statement. But we envision a world where it becomes socially unacceptable to identify with the anti-human rights position that is interfering with another person's autonomy and reproductive rights. People should be embarrassed and ashamed to identify with such a position. So in order to do that, you need to have a deep understanding of who your opposition is and what they're up to and what makes them tick. And effective direct action is grounded in research. I think, and just a final observation, and then I'll pass it back to Ivania, but I think a number of people probably don't understand how much social action and research can and should be interwoven.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you pay attention to the name, like Reproaction, it's direct action. We're also, it's rooted in the research that we conduct and that our partners conduct in the movement. All right, Heather, let's wrap us up. What led to your understanding of the importance of research in advancing social justice issues?
Hello, thank you. I am so honored to be sharing conversation with you all, and this is just such a fabulous opportunity to talk. I mean, I guess first I'll say that I identify as a first-generation college student from a rural area, and I definitely struggled to find my way in place in many university settings, like from undergrad to grad school. My work in scholarship and activism really focuses on sexual violence and intersectionality, race, gender, and science, trauma, and healing. And so early on, I realized that much of the academic research that I was reading in classes really didn't seem to be speaking to my experiences of gender violence, nor my friends' experiences of gender violence. And I really quickly learned later through my activism and advocacy work that especially didn't speak to Black, Brown, and Indigenous women and men's experiences in the communities that I was part of and participating in. I learned this largely from doing this activism work in rape crisis centers at my university, where I started as an undergrad. I later worked on volunteering in crisis counseling and response and group facilitation, did community education campaigns and activism. So we worked with a lot of legislators, public policy makers, community members, students in high schools on really thinking about how to combine research, science, and activism. So, you know, this kind of continued when I went back to grad school after 5 years of working in law and activism for social justice. And I felt kind of, you know, at that point felt more determined to think about how gender violence, including child sexual violence and state violence in carceral systems, was remarkably under-theorized and under-researched in my experience in sociology, especially through a lens of social justice, which to me has always been this experiential lens requiring qualitative, narrative, discursive approaches through a feminist intersectional framework. I turned to women's studies for additional guidance, but largely had to really seek out and learn about Black feminist thought and theory and kind of cobble together these interdisciplinary works from many disciplines and activist perspectives to really better understand why my social justice perspective didn't seem to fit or really sit right with many of my professors and colleagues, at least in my experience. So it's kind of like, yeah, that performative work, that like finding your place. I've always been doing advocacy and activism work through scholarship. I saw really the importance of research for grant writing, for funding, without which that work and those resources would really disappear. I saw the importance of systematic research methodologies through those practices as they applied to community activism and partnerships, and creating knowledge together that best fits the needs and concerns of communities and organizations, rather than imposing those models that do not fit. And you know, thinking about advancing social justice issues, I'd seen how, you know, my research can create like additional platforms for others working in advocacy for gender violence prevention and resources when applied to different audiences, really focusing on disseminating this work in a variety of spaces, especially through applied research and participatory action research that I've worked with colleagues and community members to literally create and maintain physical space for community. social justice and action and those necessary resources for personal survival, whether that's resources distributed as material goods to community members or nonprofit organizations, activists, startups in my city of Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and to the students that I really teach and work on mentoring first-gen college students every day. So that's kind of, just to kind of ground where I think I came into this work as we continue on with this wonderful discussion.
All right, thank you so much. Just want to tease you a bit. Before we started, you were like, I don't know if I have much to say. But also, the responses were so comprehensive. I want to thank y'all for sharing that, your journeys, because each of you hit on points, and some of it was interconnected. But I want to just pull out that whether it's in movement work or in the ivory tower, right, or in all these different ventures, sociology and law, and in a variety of ways of how those things came together. It's thanks for the insight, and I also like for people who are in attendance, they can hear the variety of ways that y'all came into this, that it continued, and not only like how you came into it, but how it continues to affect the work that you do, and how your work then goes on to affect the work that other people do to advocate. So thank y'all for sharing that. All right, so let's talk research standards. Kelly and Aaron, as movement leaders, how do you determine what will counterpass as useful research? And Kelly, we'll start with you.
Sure. I think this is such an interesting question, because I think, again, for me, it really depends on the audience. I'm just, as an advocate, I'm very big on the mapping of who you're trying to reach, and then, determining what methods of information might be best served in your quest to kind of reach that person. And so when determining, what will count or pass as useful research, I think a lot of factors go into effect. I mean, I think, the truth is that when you're working on abortion, which again, I've done for a long time, then it is imperative that that our data and research is above board, that it is robust, that it is tested, it is IRB approved, is passing scientific standards. Again, I'm coming from a scientific research perspective in my current role at Guttmacher Institute, but I will be clear, I think there's a lot of different kinds of research, and they are all useful in many different ways. But when I'm thinking about the scientific research, I think really being grounded in science and facts is what makes it useful, again, because I think we're just under such scrutiny when you're legislating on or working on policy issues related to abortion, that you kind of have to have just that basic level of acceptance of what the facts are. Now, our opponents do not have a basic level of acceptance of what the facts are, and so that is part of what we are battling. But I think to be able to know that that the research that we use is, again, just scientifically valid and sound, is just allows us to kind of head off any arguments or questions about the validity of that science. Again, people do not always follow science when it comes to things like public policies on all kinds of issues, unfortunately. But if it does feel important to make sure that we are keeping that up. And then I think, how do you determine what will count as useful research? You do that by being a good coalition partner, by being a collaborator, by understanding what is going on kind of on the ground, what are patients experiencing when it comes to, needing to access abortion care, what are providers experiencing, and letting that guide the research questions that need to be answered, because it also guides the policy solutions that we're seeking to enact, right? And so everything really does stem from wanting to understand what is the experience of somebody trying to provide or access abortion care in the U.S., and then what are the missing pieces of information that we might need to be able to build a better policy case for filling those gaps. And so I just want to hold both of those things really closely that it's about science and strong research and scientific grounding, and then it is about what is happening in reality and what do people need, what do they say that they need, how do we trust them to be the guiders of what the policy solutions are, and then what we need to be able to, again, advance those policy solutions.
Yep. Thank you so much for that, and for itemizing those or listing those out. Erin?
Yeah, thank you, Ivania, and thank you, Kelly, for that. Always a fan of the incredible leadership that Guttmacher Institute offers, and you, Kelly. It's so important. So I'll answer the question this way. When it comes to the anti-abortion movement and the broader white Christian nationalist movement, we're up against literally billions and billions of dollars being spent to disinform people and to turn against the tide of public opinion, which generally supports abortion rights. In fact, I'll just take a point of personal privilege in noting that the United States is actually the outlier and the exception around the world right now, as most of the world is moving toward increasingly liberalizing anti-abortion policy. My point is that there's so much to work with out there with these billions and billions of dollars that they're spending all day, every day. There are new harassment campaigns being launched by anti-abortion activists, new bills being hatched that would criminalize people's reproductive lives and their entire lives, using reproductive moments in their lives as a wedge to get in, new disinformation, and I'll just call it crap because that's really what it is, being flooded onto the internet by their various PR organs. It's an enormous juggernaut. So while it's important to scan and maintain a broader view of what's going on, to be selective is to understand where power operates, and especially for the opponents that we're working against. And so that's why it's very important when evaluating what will be useful research about what direction it might take. So just to give like an example of this, one area that's widely misunderstood are anti-abortion crisis pregnancy centers and what they mean. So anti-abortion crisis pregnancy centers are institutions whose ostensible purpose is to shame and mislead people seeking abortion care, although they often present themselves as if they were legitimate healthcare providers, like literally sometimes calling themselves a woman's choice or opening up across the street from a legitimate reproductive healthcare provider. And they do that in order to trick people seeking abortions from coming to come into their doors. Now, there are a number of worthy reasons to be upset about what they're doing and why to fight them. I just want to say, that's one of them, including the fact that they're shaming people, misleading people, sometimes experimenting on people with so-called treatments that they've like literally invented with their volunteers that have not been subjected to appropriate medical review, sometimes outright lying to people about how their bodies work or what abortion does, when the reality is that abortion is overwhelmingly safe. It is like stupid level safe, so safe that medication abortion is safer than Tylenol. Other people get really upset about the fact, and justifiably so, that public dollars are being spent on anti-abortion crisis pregnancy centers for what is essentially unaccountable activity based upon personal beliefs. And that too is a really legit focus. I mean, these places are a racket. If you want to see what graft looks like, look at anti-abortion crisis pregnancy centers raking in public dollars. But I think there's a bigger reason to look at them as well that I think often gets lost when people talk about the lying and the shaming and the misleading and the money. Anti-abortion crisis pregnancy centers are the backbone of the anti-abortion movement. They are the power core of the anti-abortion movement. This is the site where they take in and spend literally billions of dollars every year and recruit and gin up volunteers to take further action. They are literally right-wing indoctrination centers that are housed in community after community. When we look at how vulnerable our democracy is, we would be remiss not to think of the fact that there are more than 2,600 of these anti-abortion crisis pregnancy centers in the United States. We actually maintain a database of this, a Reproaction, the fake clinic database. that exist in towns near you, and they're fighting a war on truth. They are conducting surveillance of vulnerable, marginalized people. They are harassing people. They are training people to take other forms of right-wing action and to escalate that in their communities. And it's truly terrifying stuff.
Agreed. I wanted to say some things about it, but I'm going to keep it moving because I don't know how concise I can keep it. So let's talk research accessibility. All right. What are some considerations for making your academic scholarship more accessible? And we'll start with Maddie Sala and go into Ruben.
Sure, no problem. I really love this question because I remember I was in a a women's studies course when I was at Emory during my graduate program, and it wasn't a very friendly, unfortunately, it wasn't a very friendly environment, particularly to women of color. And so I remember the person when we went and we were explaining our research, and mine is on school desegregation cases that came before Brown versus Board of Education, specifically Chinese American, Mexican American, and Native American cases. And so I was talking about that, and I gave a relatively simple presentation on my work, and theirs was more cerebral. I'll say that. And again, being a first gener, I'm very plain spoken. And so they said, oh, your work is so accessible. But the way that they said it, I looked at them, I said, I know that you're trying to insult me by saying that it's accessible. But I actually consider it a compliment. For me, it's honestly, it's so simple and maybe too simple. But I told them, I said, I don't want to write a book. I don't want to write something that I cannot read to my mother and she won't understand. My mother comes from Mexico. She has second grade education. She's one of the smartest people I've ever known. And I told him, I said, I don't want my products or the stuff that I put out to be something that is illegible to the very people that I'm trying to share their stories with. Not tell their stories, they have their own stories. I just get the pleasure and opportunity of being able to share them. And I think that I try to think about my mom, when I do the kind of research that I do, and when I'm writing. The other people that I think about are the students that I served for such a long time, and the students in my classroom. When I was in multicultural affairs, we had a Black History program, and my students, I used to encourage them to all go to each other's events, all the affinity groups that were part of there. And I had one of the leaders from the Asian American student group and the Latina student group come into my office afterwards, and they said, we really love that. It was about Brown versus Board of Education. And she said, but did we do anything? That's what they wanted to know, meaning did Latinos or Asian Americans do anything? And they said, did we do anything, or did we just sit on the sidelines and let African Americans do all the work, basically? And I said, I'm sure we did something because, being an attorney, I know how the law works. There's going to be something that's similar, along the way. And so I started to research the other cases for those students, and that's what ended up becoming my research. So my book is almost something that it's something that I think about my students reading and being able to see themselves in my book, or in the stuff, in the things that I write about. I wrote another article about mentoring called Collectors, Nightlights, and Allies. Oh my, white mentors in the academy, and the emails that I've gotten from people, saying how much they enjoyed reading the article, how much they felt seen, by the article. That's really the kind of, the hearts that I know I've gotten to individuals. So yeah, so that's one of the things I consider. I consider, can my mom read it and understand it, and will my students relate to it?
Wonderful, wonderful. Heather, where are you on this?
Well, thanks. And absolutely, I will just echo that idea of using language like to weaponize what we're doing, you know, I had often been told like, oh, you write so simply, and you know how that feels as a derogatory statement in the academy. I mean, that's certainly one place to push back on. You know, I'll also say, like, I'll probably refer to like where the power operates, because that was such a beautiful way of really pinpointing many things here. I continuously try to stay grounded, and my grounding is doing the work and remaining an activist in advocacy spaces, because then it does ground my research and academic work. I'm still really obviously learning and growing here, and we should continue to do so, really thinking about like how do we format academic research, the use of words, you know, how we can use different formats like white papers, or to increase accessibility, webinars, podcasts, you know, other social media outlets that I am very bad at, but to activate each other to share that needed information, you know, providing and sharing the tools that we need to work with and against policy and law making bodies to challenge the work of, you know, particular organizations, as well as we are doing at times, and to also support that work. I do want to add, maybe just to the conversation, is considering, you know, particular audiences, purposes, but also, to me, an overarching issue of accessibility is that space of collaboration and research and activist partnerships working together towards social justice goals. Relying on each other's expertise is extremely important. Building our capacities of support and acknowledgement, and the true collaboration, which means really sharpening our conflict and communication skills, being able to see and feel each other and give each other the grace and space for this work, and honoring each other for those changing and challenging capacities. So really challenging dominant culture notions of productivity and success, you know, in the work that we do, and arguments about what is the best way or the best method to make change and to survive. Because I think a lot of what we really are talking about is underlying survival for ourselves, our communities, and our organizations.
Yep. Such wonderful responses. See, this is why y'all are on a panel. Okay. So let's talk support for research. How would you like to see support for your research and/or research more generally improve? Kelly, give us a brief response. See if you can knock this out in 90 seconds.
Sure. I mean, I just think, like anything, more financial support helps, but also, again, that deeper collaboration. So more commitment from funders for research, although they already do a great deal, but I think non-abortion specific funders should get into the game. And again, that collaboration, you cannot do meaningful scientific research if the question that you're trying to answer is not informed by what folks need. And the only way you can do that is by you know, being in partnership and collaboration with them.
Thanks for being that concise and on the money. All right, Heather?
Absolutely. Yes, I would like to see funding for participatory action research, community collaborations, and partnerships. That is in our universities, but I would like to see it not only credited at universities, but more so promoted, publicized, and supported. I'd like to see more grants and resources allocated to this work. The removal, and to me, really largely, we should talk about or understand the removal of structural barriers to disseminating resources directly to community organizations without cost overheads and indirects that only take away from our community work and research and you know, our lives and survival and our participation there. I'd like to see more intentional workshops dedicated to transformative justice work and the theories and research that activists use when organizing, because that is what's necessary for collaborations, how to manage conflicts, address burnout, and highly effective states and social justice work. and scholarship so that we can better support each other and ourselves.
Good. I have absolutely nothing to add. Thank you all for being so thorough in your responses and concise in your responses. All right. So this question is the money question, right? We've been talking, well, y'all have been bringing up collaboration a lot, which, hey, that's what we're doing here in this series. And I want to know, how could movement leaders and academics improve how they work together to conduct research and publicize findings? And Maricela, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I think that, one of the things that, being a critical race scholar, that I love about that is the storytelling aspect. I feel like many of the movement leaders have the stories that the academics need to capture, and be able to tell the stories of the individuals that they're ultimately representing. And I think that, deciding together where to publish, if that's like an opinion piece that they can do together, or if there's, if there's a podcast they can do together, or, something to that effect, because I think that, it doesn't always have to go the traditional route, of academic journals that only a particular population will read. So yeah, that's I know that's maybe oversimplified, but that's how I could see people, movement leaders and academics working together.
No, that's great. You just generated my idea generator. Like you just got me going. I was like, oh my God. Stay tuned. Once I like where you're going. All right. And so, Erin, how could movement leaders and academics improve how they work together to conduct research and publicize findings?
Yeah, thank you. And it's an awesome question. And thank you for raising it, because you, Ivania Woods, are a PhD in sociology and the Senior Vice President of Research and Movement Building for Reproaction. I hope that there's time for you to share your own thoughts. And in service of that, I'll just say one thing briefly from my vantage point. I think that each side has something that the other does not have. In the case of academics, your data is generally respected as truth and presented that way in the media in a way that is very difficult for movement-rooted organizations to do, although Guttmacher has certainly done it. In the case of NGOs, nonprofits, and social movements, we are something on the flip side that NGOs, nonprofits, and social movements have that academic do not. We are much less beholden to the vicissitudes of public funding and the scrutiny that can come from state and federal legislators who have ideological ideas against the work. And to put it in plain English, I worry when public universities are the sole holders of publicly available information and research about abortion more generally, or our opposition specifically, or any topic, because those public universities are subject to laws, and in some cases, some very negative law makers that could forbid them from continuing that work. So the point that I have is that we have to invest in all of it. It's a both and, but we should be working together more to take advantage of what everyone brings to the table. And I'll pause there. And Ivani, I don't know if you feel there's time for you to answer it, but I also want to acknowledge what you put together with this discussion series is an important step toward that collaboration, and I want to make sure that everyone listening recognizes that.
Thank you. Actually, this is a part of it, right? Like going back to a conversation you and I had last year, this is the vision. I'm like, I was in grad school going back and forth, like, oh, do I want to go into academia? That's why I started this PhD program, but I'm doing this movement work, and I was struggling with that. Like, I didn't know which way to go, and it's a false binary, right? Like and I did that for years, and it was like my academic mentor, not really much of a mentor, but was pushing me to go into academia. We need your voice here, as a Black woman, as a woman of color, it's like we need you. And then I'm doing movement work, And I was an economic justice at the time, and they're telling me, you know, get your PhD, your voice will be, you know, more valuable in this movement space, and people will listen to you, and you'll be able to do the work here, and it'll just amplify what you're able to do. And I was just like, okay, well, I want to do both. and it finally occurred to me, like, I am doing both. While I was stressing about teetering that line, I was doing it. You know what I mean? Like, in my mind, abstractly, it felt like a binary, but in practice, I was already doing the things, right? I was teaching, I was doing research, and my specialty is social movement and inequalities, and, you know, actually out in movement work, community organizing. So, yeah, that, and I've talked about that with grad students and people thinking about going into grad school who are doing, like, yeah, just erase that from your mind. But I think that we can stop acting like these things are separated and they're separate when we're all just doing different aspects. But we're all needed for this, and we need to be resisting from wherever we are, however we can, and finding ways, again, to collaborate, to strengthen our work, our messages, and our ability to increase our reach, and people who hear about, you know, the work that we're doing and what we're doing, so that they're aware of what's happening around them. Because if not, then they tend to lean towards conspiracies, and we don't need any more of that. We have enough of that. All right, so let's wrap this up. There are people who are eager to know, like, if you have any advice for researchers and/or suggestions for sources to improve research conducted in the interest of advancing social justice issues. And we're just going to go, like, in the order we've been going. I'm not going to interrupt in this sequence. So when Kelly finishes, Maricela, you just pick on up. Erin, you pick up after Maricela, and so forth. So yeah, Kelly, start us off. What do you want people to know? Like, what has helped you, and what advice or suggestions do you think can help others?
Thank you. Thanks, everybody, and thanks for putting on this great panel. Yeah, I think what I want people to know, I'm definitely like a one-note wonder on this panel, but I think that our work is so much stronger when it's integrated. And so breaking out of whatever kind of silo that you are in, whether it is advocacy or activism or policy work or research of various kinds, that we are stronger and strongest when our work is deeply integrated. And that just means, you know, having a lot of conversations and a lot of connections with folks that you might not normally talk to, and with different components or aspects of the field that you're working in. And I think those are the kinds of times and opportunities where you can kind of get that magic spark and get curious about a question or an issue that you hadn't thought of before or worked on before, and maybe somebody else has. And I think it just really strengthens our kind of all-around perspective and opportunity to, you know, again, in my case, advance sound public policies using research as a backbone. So thank you all.
Yeah, I think that, you know, one of the advice that I would have is stay connected to the people that help to make your research possible. You know, one of the things that I did when I researched the Native American case, you know, is that this is really where I think decolonizing methodology came into play, because you know, historians want documents, right? Archival documents, and so that's why I call it sort of the papers versus the people, because the people told me a very different story about Alice Piper, as her name is the lead plaintiff in that particular case. And so any other information that I found about Alice Piper, I shared it with the nation, with the Owens Valley Paiute Nation, and I just actually kind of, you know, it's really exciting. I just got a call from an individual who's getting ready to organize the 100-year anniversary of the Alice Piper case, because 1924 is when it happened. And, you know, and it was so nice to be able to get connected to them. And I ended up, you know, because of that connection, I ended up getting connected to another person from the tribe that was able to share more information with me, about Alice, and we were able to share that information together, and I think that the goal and, their desires to want to get the Alice Piper story out there, because a lot of people don't know about it. And, I just feel really honored to even be any part of it. And I'm grateful that they, included me, but I think it's largely because we keep that I kept that relationship open with the Owens Valley Paiute Nation.
Thank you, Marisela. So for me, I'll just answer it with, first off, welcome. There's so much work to be done and we all have something to contribute. I'll just reflect on some basic research stuff, but it bears saying here because disinformation around social justice issues is so high. It's imperative to dig deeply, take the work seriously, verify, and hold extremely strict standards for holding what is truth and how to make accurate claims that are irrefutable. There's always more context to be understood. If you look at opponents of social justice, as we do at Reproaction, one key thing is that they lie a lot. So you have to be especially critical of information from them. And I just want to say this directly: with the advent of CGI and AI, we can't and don't even trust videos as proof that something happened unless we're able to otherwise source it. This is just the world we live in now. And then regarding the question on sources to improve on research skills, I just come at that with a lot of humility as an advocate who just happens to be a fact hawk and a research hawk, and let the academics take that one. So thank you.
Thank you. And yes, all of that. And I think, I want to just add, teaching is really important here to me, as well as how to improve and conduct social justice issues, and always looking for where the power operates again. I think teaching media literacy is extremely important here. I think we can turn to a lot of social movements to understand these questions, like reproductive orgs, labor union work, Black feminism, transformative justice organizations, to learn how to navigate spaces and be better connected and support each other. And then where the power operates in our universities, I think always being active in conversations on campus about grants and these indirects, challenging IRB policies, being active in supporting student groups inside and outside our classes, be active when we're invited to step forward or to step back accordingly, and engage our students, offer research options and assistantships, approach, in particular, the quiet students, the first gen students, speaking as a quiet student myself, and the students of color who may not be approaching professors and teachers about research and how they want to participate, participate as McNair mentors, EOP mentors, TRIO members in our spaces, our mentors in our spaces, so we can generate conversations with new social justice activists.
Yep, right on point. For all of you, thank you so very much for agreeing to be on this panel and for bringing your expertise. Quite sound. So grateful for each of you. The next panel is November 15th. It's Integrative Approaches in Action, where we'll be talking about more specifically in the realm of how teaching, research, and activism can come together, right? So we talked about teaching, we talked about research, and now, but we've been talking about them in conversation with activism, and now we're going to talk about all three of them together. So go ahead and register for that. And if you want to see what Reproaction and SWS is doing, you can check us out. You can follow them on social media at Reproaction, at Social Women. You can email Reproaction at reproaction@reproaction.org. You can visit the websites, reproaction.org and socialwomen.org. And again, thanks everybody for attending. Thanks the panelists for showing up. And for the people who asked questions that we weren't able to get to, apologies. We only had 60 minutes. I tried to squeeze you in, but we just didn't have the time. But if you do want to follow up with anyone who was on this panel, feel free to do so. And thank y'all again. Have a great rest of your day. And hopefully you'll be back for the third panel. Bye, y'all.